Welcome back to Dad and Daughter Reads, a book club podcast. This week, we're continuing our journey through James by Percival Everett, covering chapters 18 through 32. And wow, this book just keeps delivering. The tension is rising, the themes are hitting harder, and the storytelling is as sharp as ever. But before we dive in, let's bring in the real star of the show, the one who keeps me on my toes with her brilliant insights and deep dives into the underlying themes, Miranda. How's it going?
The real star of the show. Wow. How's it going? It's going, just hanging in there. Had a decent week. Been trying to keep myself busy to combat the winter blues. How's your week been?
Not well. I am sick, so I probably sound a little different. I've got a head cold, lots of drainage and coughing and sneezing, so I'm gonna push through this recording and get it done, though.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, I'll try my best. So what have you been reading this past week?
It's been a bit of a slow week for me, to be completely honest with reading. I'm still kind of in the middle of the books I've been in the middle of. I have decided that I have to take a pause. I'm not going to not finish Crying in H Mart, but I need to take a pause on it because it is very sad. And we're in a very sad season in general, so I'm taking a pause on that, and I think I'm going to listen to a different audiobook, a different memoir that actually just came out this past month. It's called Wild Wild West by Lola Kirk, who I think is another singer, actress or something, entertainer. But it's a book about her time living in New York City, and as we all know by now, I live in New York City, so I love a New York City memoir. So that's what I'm going to start probably tomorrow.
All right, sounds good. I finished the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. That first book is The Fifth Season, and that thing had me in shambles about 3/4 of the way through the book. I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. Now, that's not a bad thing because it was engrossing, and then all of a sudden, the realization hit about 3/4 of the way of what was going on, and I was like, what the fuck? There's a reason this book won the Hugo Award in 2016. But not only that, N.K. Jemisin actually looked this up. She's the first African-American to win that award. But it gets even better. She won it 3 times in a row for this trilogy. So this is like the first trilogy that's ever won where every book has won the Hugo Award. And it was 3 in a row, 16, 17, and 18. So that's pretty amazing. And I think just from reading that first book, I think this whole trilogy is going to be a must read for everyone out there.
Yeah, you got me excited about it. Dad said he's going to send me the books, so I'm excited to read those myself.
Yeah, I will mail them to you when I am done with them.
Woohoo. Is it sci-fi or fantasy or both?
It's sci-fi.
Okay.
So it takes place, I guess it's supposed to take place in our world, but far into the future.
Okay. Cool.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's a different world. Like the continent is different than our continents, but there's like one major continent and there may be others. It's kind of hinted at, but I don't think, at least in the first book, they didn't really talk about them too closely.
I could use another sci-fi book. I don't have a lot of like sci-fi fantasy on my list right now. So
yeah, it's definitely science fiction, kind of deals with more climate change kind of stuff that kind of ruined the world and how they're dealing with that. It's not as contemporary as, say, Parable of the Sower, much more science fiction.
Okay, cool. Yeah, super interested. Got me excited.
Cool. All right, from here, let's go into the social media book buzz, which we got a doozy this week. Kind of fell down a rabbit hole here. So this week we have Fourth Wing series drama, right? Technically, the name of the series is The Empyrean, but although I haven't only ever heard people call it the Fourth Wing series. So the third book in the series, which we've talked about before, Onyx Storm, that released a couple weeks ago and has caused another stir, but this time it's within the fandom, when some other content creators outside the fandom gave some not so well received critiques on the book and the series itself. So I want to preface this by saying attacking people for liking something like this series is wrong. Calling them stupid for liking this series or whatever, that's not what I'm talking about here. That should not be tolerated. I'm talking about critical analyzation of a piece of literature, in this case, this series of books by Rebecca Yarros. I think this series can be criticized for its prose, its world building, character building, etc., just like any other piece of literature. And the author's original intention does not matter. So it's just a fun book, you don't get it, that's not going to hold water here because it's still a book that can be critically analyzed. Because, like we discussed last week, once an author releases a book, it's really no longer their book. Each reader brings their own experiences, interpretations, and imagination to the text, thereby creating a unique understanding of the story that is not solely dictated by the author.
Mm-hmm. So to be clear, what we're saying here is that you didn't see any videos of people like explicitly like hating on the book or hating on the fandom. We just saw people like critiquing it and analyzing it.
Right. So the creator I saw, her name is, I think, Mary, Mari. And she had made a critique on the book and the series in general.
Yeah.
And then another creator made a video saying, or she was, I guess this other creator, this fan of the series that made the video wasn't exactly directed at Mary, I don't think, but she used it to show that people are saying, hey, you don't get it. It's just a fun book. And then she used her video to say, no, it's still a piece of work that can be analyzed critically because it's literature.
Yeah.
So that was what it was all about. And that's kind of gave me the inspiration to talk about this here.
Yeah, because so maybe like fans were kind of attacking her for seemingly attacking them and their fun, even though that's not really what she was doing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So this fanaticism, I guess it had some other names like toxic fandom or stan culture or whatever. Isn't Eminem great? He came up with this whole stan thing, right?
Wait, did he really?
Yeah, he has a song.
Oh.
I think it's called Stan, or I mean, where he talks about this Stan guy who's like in love with who loves the rapper or whoever. I don't know. I don't remember it exactly.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Eminem like coined that. Okay.
Yeah. It's from one of his songs. You'd have to go look it up because I can't remember exactly. It's been a while.
Yeah, I will.
But anyway, this isn't just, So anyway, this isn't isolated to just this series with, written by Rebecca Yarros, this Fourth Wing series. This is going to be more of a discussion on the entire psychological and social phenomenon that has more than likely been amplified by social media. Right. Of course, like everything else.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can remember a time when I was 12 and I was very obsessed with Twilight. So
right. And if anybody said anything bad about Twilight, you were ready to claw their eyes out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, of course, this was when I was 12. So
right. You were not an adult. So, you get a little bit of a pass there, right?
Sure.
So there's some reasons for this, several reasons that I've come up with. Identity fusion. This is when someone deeply identifies with something. Basically, it becomes a whole part of their personality. And this reminds me of, because I'm a veteran, you have these vet bros, right? These are the guys walking around with their hats and all that stuff. So, and what they do is they make being a veteran an entire part of their personality. They'll wear the hats, the clothes, and making sure everybody know, hey, I'm a veteran. So come thank me for my service.
Right.
They talk constantly about it. And even, they may have been discharged years and years ago. I mean, they could have been a Vietnam veteran and they're wearing their hats and they want to make sure everybody knows that they were a veteran. Mm-hmm. And they'll defend the military no matter what. I mean, even if it's a critique from another veteran, they'll still defend it.
Right.
And personally, I don't understand it. And it really annoys the hell out of me. As I was a veteran, I was in the Army for 9 years and I don't talk about it. And it's not because I have PTSD or anything. I was in the 90s. Where nothing happened. Bill Clinton was president. All we did was like peacekeeping missions.
Yeah.
Quote unquote. Anyway, so that's identity fusion. So then you also have community and belonging. Fandoms provide a sense of community. Sometimes they will get their whole community to rail against someone that may have critiqued the thing they are a fan of. These attacks can get pretty crazy too, like to the point of death threats, which is crazy, just stupid, ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then investment. They're both emotionally and possibly monetarily invested in things. They'll invest their time, emotions, and their cash into the chosen media or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Then they have a defensive psychology. The more time and energy that they put into this, the more likely they become psychologically motivated to defend that investment. It's almost like a sunk cost fallacy. The more time you've committed to something, accepting criticism can feel like you've wasted that investment that you put into it. Mm-hmm. And then you have parasocial relationships, and this is especially prevalent with ongoing series, like think big series like Star Wars, Marvel, things like that, or even celebrity careers, which I've seen a lot of crazy things going on right now with something, I don't know all the details, something about Ryan Reynolds and his wife and some other guy she was in a movie in. I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah, the Blake Lively, This Ends With Us drama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So over time, someone can develop an emotional bond, and criticism of that celebrity or that series can feel like someone is attacking a friend because you feel like you've known that person, especially with a celebrity, even though you really don't, but you follow them and you pretty much know everything that's going on in their life for the most part. So it can feel like they're attacking a friend.
Yeah, parasocial relationships, especially these days, are like huge. They're like a huge problem, I feel like, in our society with like celebrities, not just celebrities in series, but also with politicians, any kind of like person that's out there. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Jojo Rabbit, but that movie deals with parasocial relationships, specifically a parasocial relationship between a young boy in Germany, I think he's in Germany, and Hitler, and how he becomes like super, super obsessed with Hitler because he's like a young boy and he doesn't really know. He just sees this like charismatic man, this politician that everybody's like going crazy about. But then like his mom is actually like anti-fascist and like against Hitler. And so it like kind of deals with that, and it deals with parasocial relationships in general. It's a really good movie. And it actually, I think I watched it in 2020 and it like completely changed my mindset on how I look at politicians and celebrities and how I like view them because of these parasocial relationships and how these people like are actually just people at the end of the day. So I would recommend that movie, but also just, I mean, parasocial relationships and like how we attach so easily to things because we're constantly being fed things. And we do feel like we have these relationships with these people or series, even though we don't.
Yeah, I'll have to check out that movie. I've heard of it, but I've never watched it.
It's really good.
Yeah, I'll check that out. If I'd heard about it before, I could have watched it while I was sick in bed the other day. Instead, I watched RoboCop. Anyway. All right, so let's talk about social media, because with social media over the last 20 years, this kind of stuff has like been turned up to 11, right? Mm-hmm. So with social media, you get an echo chamber, right? So algorithms, they're going to feed content that reinforces those existing views because, like, you know, it's kind of like the same thing I said with TikTok, right? That's why I like TikTok so much. Once you get your algorithm set up, you're only seeing things that you like. And maybe that's a bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you should see some other things that, you know, that are counterpoint to what you believe.
Yeah, it certainly can be. It certainly can be a bad thing, for sure.
And people can easily block dissenting opinions. So if you come across something that you don't like, all you got to do is block them. Then you never get to see their opinion again.
Right, exactly. Which I think is where sometimes it can get bad, depending on what you're being fed.
Right. And what this does, it creates a bubble where only fans of that, whatever it is, are interacting with each other, which makes criticism feel more hostile because you're in this bubble. You get on your social media, all you see is good things about the thing. And then all of a sudden you come across that one thing and you just feel like you're attacked. Then there's tribalism amplification. So it's easy to form an us versus them, like what I just talked about there. You're in your bubble, you see all the people that like what you like, and then that one comes up and then you can like set everybody and their mother on them, right? Mm-hmm. And us versus them. And then the criticism, you will say, comes from haters or rival fandoms. Mm-hmm. And then because this is out in the public forum, it becomes a performative battle where you try to get in the funniest little quip so all the people that are on your side can like your post and say, ha, 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 whatever. Mm-hmm. That's tribalism there. Now, there's some other things that are causing this, I believe, and one of those is a decline in critical thinking. And why is that? There's information overload, right? There's just so much information out there. It can feel exhausting to try to formulate a deep analysis on everything. If you work all day, especially if you have a job that, you know, you think a lot in, say you're a programmer like myself, then you're analyzing everything already. So when it's time to not worry about work and you want to get into your hobbies, whatever, you don't want to have to deeply analyze things anymore, right?
Yeah, sure.
So there is an information overload on all of us, especially with the internet. I mean, before the internet, you didn't have as much information. Now you have it all right in your pocket.
Right. Constant.
And then here's your favorite, hot take culture.
Yes, so I do have many hot takes.
Social media awards quick emotional reactions over thoughtful analysis, right? Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes back to the little quips, right? When somebody says something and you come back with a little sarcastic quip, you know, it's quick, it's filled with emotion, and then you see all your buddies that are also into the same thing liking your post. And then you get that, what do they call it? The ratio. because your post has more likes than the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then also decreased attention spans, which also I think has something else to do with social media, where it's about consuming quantity and not quality.
Mhm.
And I think I said this about TikTok as well, where that's why I like TikTok. It's quick. You can see a video about something you want to see about and just keep doom scrolling, right?
Right.
So it's more about quantity than quality. So what can we do about this? So we can normalize nuanced discussion, right? Nothing's perfect. You can acknowledge that you can love something, but you still see that it does have some flaws to it. And this is difficult with the way social media works, right? Because it's all out in the open. So you don't want to say that, yeah, I can see that it has flaws, because then all your buddies are now going to jump on you, right? All your buddies that like the same stuff, they may not feel that, they may not want to have that critical thinking or that nuanced discussion. They just want to continue to fester the wound and just keep going at it.
Mm-hmm.
You can practice emotional distance. So people need to realize that just because I critique something that you love doesn't mean I'm personally attacking you. We kind of talked about that with Twilight with you, right? Jokingly.
Right.
Yeah, so it's not an attack on you when somebody critiques something. That's what you really have to remember. And then promote media literacy. So people need to engage with criticism constructively. And I think that starts with taking the emotions out of the equation. Critical thinking is important here, and you want to ask why questions in order to try to understand the critic's viewpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should ask with curiosity and not defensiveness. Like I said, again, you need to realize that they're not attacking you. They're really not attacking necessarily the piece of work either. It's just their opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to agree with that opinion, but you should not attack them because you think they're attacking you.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to media literacy, like we've had something here recently that's happened, the Super Bowl halftime show, right?
Yeah.
So like you see all these people saying, I don't understand it. I don't get it. It's boring. I can't understand what he's saying, blah, blah, blah. And they're just not picking up on the cues. They're not looking at it in a critical way, because that Super Bowl halftime show by Kendrick Lamar had more allegories than the book we're reading, James, I think.
Yeah.
Like there was just so much symbolism in that show that people just missed.
And it's also so funny because I actually saw a video of this woman. She was a white woman, and I would assume she was a conservative Republican, and she just took it all wrong. She was like, he was showing the American flag, and she was serious. Like, this was real. She was like, I just loved he's showing the American flags, and he was calling out the pedophiles of Hollywood and this, that, and the other. And I was like, oh my God.
Right. So that's worse than not. That's worse than saying that you don't understand it, because she's actually putting something else completely into it.
Yes. I mean, I was so upset. I was like, I can't believe that some people watched this and they were like, oh, he's on our side.
Oh my God.
So that's scary. But media literacy and people just kind of seeing what they want to see as well. People hearing what they want to hear, see what they want to see to back their own ideology. Yeah,
this kind of goes with James, right? Because we're talking about slavery here with James. He said, 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
So how the fuck did she think that he was on their side?
No, and that's what people were saying in the comments too. They were like, so what does 40 acres and a mule mean to you? And everybody was like, probably nothing. She probably don't know what that is.
Oh my God. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So just, lack of education in general as well. But that does have a huge play with media literacy, which is a really, really big problem these days. Like, they really need to be teaching media literacy in school.
Yes. And I have the perfect person to follow on TikTok for that. His name is Dr. C. And he's got a PhD in I don't know what exactly, but he's also a professor at an HBCU school. And basically he reads comic books, and he kind of, not just comic books, but just pop culture in general. And he kind of takes things and talks about certain things and how pop culture affects them. Like, he's got a podcast, he's on TikTok. His latest podcast, he's been talking a lot about death. And so he'll talk about things like, comic books and how death happens in those. And I mean, it's cool. One of his latest TikToks, he was stitching some guy that had how these right wingers have these Punisher emblems on their hats or whatever. And he went totally off on him and explained to him that no, the Punisher would not be like that. because, this guy knows exactly what the Punisher would be like because he's read it all.
Right.
So yeah, he does things like that, and it's really kind of cool.
Yeah, that's cool. But yeah, so after reading your huge in-depth analysis here, I was like, all right, let me go ask my friends who are fans of this series, like if they heard of anything that had happened, if they saw anything, how they felt about it, because I'm pretty far removed from it because I'm not paying attention to Fourth Wing, honestly.
Right.
So I asked them and I texted them and I told them like what the deal was. And we had good discussions about, they were very, I mean, like one friend did bring up, people do like to hate on things for clout. Like that's absolutely a true thing that happens, which, is again for like likes, for engagement, for this, that, and the other. So there's extremes both ways. There's people who are just out there hating for no reason. But then there's the toxic fandom.
That was kind of like what I was going to talk about last week with that one woman I said looked like a Muppet. Because
Right.
hers was she just was doing it for clout.
Exactly. Yeah. So that absolutely exists, but we did touch in the beginning, and that's why I wanted to make it clear that like we weren't talking about people who were just hating to hate. We were like talking about actual people who are critiquing the work itself. So I asked my friends what they thought about it, and they were pretty much like, yeah, no, like any work can be critiqued and it's not gonna personally affect me. Like I'm still gonna read my smutty little fantasy book because I want to just enjoy it and I'm gonna laugh at it and I'm gonna, I don't care. And that's what I also said to them too. I was like, yeah, I mean, I watch the Kardashians. That doesn't mean I love the Kardashians or think that they're like amazing. It's just sometimes I want to not think about my drama and I want to watch some trashy TV, and deal with other people's drama that I'm like so far removed from. But it was really funny. My friend, and this is a lewd comment if you want to skip through it, but my friend said, fandoms would rather suck an author's dick than engage in constructive criticism, which I was like, please let me quote you on that because that's hilarious. But that's kind of what you were saying too, fandoms would rather just, they're in this mentality, this parasocial relationship or these, just emotional connections to these texts that they don't want to think about, the bad things about it. And they're going to like critique you for critiquing it. But then she also said something funny too. She said, well, please continue critiquing Rebecca Yarros because she needs an editor. But just the idea too that like people are not necessarily reading these books because they want to read some profound literature. I think my friend said like if I wanted to read Hemingway, I'd read Hemingway. So, they're not, it's just a fun little thing. And my take is if somebody wants to critique it, fine. That's a hobby. They're allowed to. They absolutely should and they can. If I come across a video of you critiquing the Kardashians, I'm going to be like, yeah, probably right. And I'm going to move on because it's just some stupid fun little thing that I do to waste time, or like to enjoy, just like watching some trashy TV or reading a trashy little book. It doesn't mean it's not entertaining or fun, or that you can't critique it if you don't want to, because you can. So my take is just like, let people critique things. Don't have an opinion about it if you don't want to. Just keep scrolling and enjoy your life and enjoy the books that you read, even if they're not Hemingway. Right. Who cares?
Yeah. And that's just what people need to do. They just need to not feel like they're attacking them as a person because they're not.
Right. Yeah. And I think for some people, it is a hobby to read books and critique them and go on social media. I mean, that's kind of what you've been doing. You've been making videos of,
right.
your thoughts and stuff on books and everything. And that's what people like to do. And if you don't agree with it, you can either have a meaningful discussion with the person or just move on or just scroll past.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's what I have been doing. So if you want to see the reviews of the books I've been reading, you can check them out on my TikTok or Instagram.
A little shameless plug there.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. The main critique that I've heard about that series by Rebecca Yarros is the world building is really bad.
Right. Yeah. Which I think
I've never read it.
Which I think my friends also said. They were like, yeah, but we don't care because that's not necessarily why we're reading it,
Right. But if somebody says that and it is bad, then, that's what they want to do. They shouldn't get attacked for it.
Right. Like my friends have jobs and lives and real things to do. So they're not like on here just like finding reasons to be mad. So
right.
It can be
and
said.
That's a lot of it too, right?
But it can be said both ways. Because if there are people out there hating on things, it's like, go touch grass. If you're out here being really, really mad because someone's hating something that you like, go touch grass. There's extremes on both ends.
But I think if it's a really good critique, that someone that does that for lots of books and has a lot to say about it, and it should be fine, and you should just take it as a grain of salt.
Exactly. And move on with your life and enjoy what you're going to enjoy. Who cares? Who cares what somebody else has to say about it?
All right. So enough of my rabbit hole there that I fell down.
All right. All right. So time for the recap of last week's episode and the last 7 chapters of James. Last week's episode, we spent a lot of time discussing the use of dialogue, which is a big part of the setup in the first couple chapters of James. James uses slave dialect when around white people and standard English when around fellow slaves. James has a bit of an unusual, almost fatherly relationship with Huck Finn, who is a very inquisitive and thoughtful character in this rendition. The story really gets going when James finds out he's about to be sold downriver and makes a run for it. He ends up on Jackson Island, where he finds Huck, who has faked his own death and ran away as well, which of course shakes James up a bit because now everyone probably thinks he killed Huck. He sticks with Huck as they travel down the Mississippi in order to eventually get to the Ohio River so James can get north. Huckleberry and James get separated, and James washes up on the shore of Illinois and runs into 4 other black men. They tell him they're in Illinois, a free state, but the white folks say they're in Tennessee. Not a free state. James asks them for a pencil so he can write, and one of them, young George, takes one for him. Later, James comes across a gathering where young George is getting whipped for taking the pencil. He tells James to run, and when he does, he reunites with Huck, which is where we will pick up.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
We have some listener feedback. Jay on Discord agreed with what we said, pretty much everything on chapters 1 through 17. She said she appreciated our deep dive into language and code switching, which was mostly you, saying she had never really questioned how enslaved people spoke before, that they've always been portrayed the same way in stories that she's read or watched, and accepted that as truth, and now realizing her ignorance. She also brought up that enslaved people were definitely lied to, giving the example of Juneteenth, where Texas was the last Confederate state that received the order that all enslaved people were free on June 19th, 1865. And that was several months after the Civil War. I'm sure even afterwards, there were still some enslaved people lied to and kept as slaves. This is me talking here now, sorry, instead of Jay. Yeah, so there was probably some more lying going on and people keeping slaves, considering that the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, wasn't even ratified until December 6th, 1865. And that's 8 months after the Civil War ended. Of course, even after all that, black folks still do not have the same rights as whites and wouldn't, according to law, for another 100 years when the Civil Rights Act was passed and signed in 1965. And then even so, I'm still not myself 100% convinced that they have the same rights to this day in some places in this country.
Right. Yeah, for sure. But we love that, Jay. We love that realization that you came to. I'm really glad that our conversations can inspire us to learn more about, these things that were happening back in the past. So thanks for your feedback, for real.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so digging into the book, John Locke, another 17th, 18th century Enlightenment philosopher. So James points out some more hypocrisy here with these so-called enlightened philosophers. I researched Locke a bit, and on Wikipedia it says Locke's views on slavery were multifaceted. And then in the book, it pretty much says the exact same thing, because Locke says, some might say that my views on slavery are complex and multifaceted, in which James replies, convoluted and multifarious. So this is funny to me because you can see that when Everett was probably researching this, hell, he might have even saw it on Wikipedia when he wrote that line. Who knows? But then they go back and forth like this, and then eventually James says labyrinthine and Daedalian. So Daedalian, this is a reference to Daedalus, I think it's pronounced. In Greek mythology, Daedalus built the labyrinth that housed the Minotaur. And, it's almost like James is in a big labyrinth himself here in this story, trying to find his and his family's way out of slavery. Some might say that.
Yeah, that was a really nice connection, Dad, that I did not pick up on. But yeah, I would agree with you. He's definitely in a big labyrinth. Yeah, it does feel kind of like a maze because sometimes I don't even know where we're at in this story. I'm like, how did we get here? Where did we go? and him and Huck kind of like coming in and out of each other too, like running into each other in this maze, trying to get wherever it is they're trying to even get to. So that was a nice connection. I like that. I also really like Greek mythology. So that was cool. But yeah, also I love that Everett is making a point to call out these so-called abolitionists and white philosophers that were said to be against slavery. How racism by white people is always prevalent, even in anti-slavery rhetoric, kind of like in Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I like James's quote to John Locke as well. He says, so what you're saying is that if someone pays you enough, it's okay to abandon what you have claimed is moral and right, which he says this about John Locke writing the Constitution for the Carolinians, which was, I'm pretty sure, put in their constitution, like pro-slavery. And yeah, which John Locke comes back at him and says, well, if I hadn't written it for them, somebody else would have. So I thought that was an interesting conversation for them to have, because, I mean, we see that happening all the time still, you know, people kind of putting aside, being a little hypocritical, you know, for money or power or status.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned that Locke had written the Constitution for Barbados before that.
Yeah, I did say that.
That did not have slavery, or like it didn't include slavery, or it excluded, like it made slavery, you know, unavailable.
Right.
Where then he goes and writes the Constitution for the Carolinas and includes slavery in that.
Yeah.
So really, he has no morals because, you know, they paid him to write those things or whatever. So he just wrote them how they wanted him to write them.
Right. Yeah. So I like this continuation of calling out these white men who were in our history portrayed as maybe being, you know, anti-slavery, not racist, even though they kind of were, because we sweep all the other stuff under the rug.
Right. All right. So now we come upon Bilgewater and the Dolphin, also known as the Duke and the King. So one major thing here in Twain's version, they use the incorrect names like they do in James, Bilgewater and Dolphin instead of Bridgewater and Dauphine, but no one corrects them. So if the Duke called the King Dolphin, he wouldn't correct him. And I think, but you know, in James, they always correct them when they say the wrong name. I think at one point they even called Huckleberry Huckleberry. And Huckleberry corrected them. So this is like in Twain's version, it shows submissiveness. In James' version, it's showing more self-respect for these characters, where they're not going to allow you to get away with calling them by the incorrect, whether it's their real name or not. Of course, with the Duke and the King, you know, we all know they're bullshitting.
Right.
So after these two share their stories, James gives Huck a look, and that he suspected that Huck suspected that they were liars. But Huck was caught up in the adventure, and that's what happened in the James book, right? But in Huckleberry Finn, it went more like this. And this is a quote. "It didn't take me long to make up my mind that these liars weren't no kings nor dukes at all." And this is Huckleberry talking. "But just low-down humbugs and frauds. But I never said nothing, never let on, kept it to myself. It's the best way. Then you don't have no quarrels and don't get into no trouble. If they wanted us to call them kings and dukes, I had no objections, long as it would keep peace in the family. And it weren't no use to tell Jim, so I didn't tell him." We don't really know if Huckleberry thinks Jim thinks they're liars or not.
Right.
But over in Jim's version, James thinks Huckleberry is aware that they are liars, but thinks also that Huck is kind of just caught up in the whole fun and adventure of it all since he's a kid.
Right. Yeah.
So I found that interesting between the two books.
Yeah. And also an interesting take on like him trying, like Huck trying to keep the peace is an interesting thing that you caught from in Mark Twain's version, you know, trying to not rile feathers or like make things worse, which is something that I think a lot of people do today. Like they don't speak on things that they should probably speak on because they don't want to cause trouble. Yeah. Interesting. Yep. Interesting. Yeah, I like the moment where in James, Huck kind of came for them. He came for them. He was because they were saying like, "Oh, we'll just pretend James is our slave, you know, to get into town or whatever." And Huck is like, "No, you can't do that." He tells them they can't pretend that James is theirs because he's scared that they might sell him, which is a practical thought, a practical fear to have. So that was cool to see Huck kind of really starting to catch on here. Wait, you know, Jim's being treated differently from me hanging out with him this whole time. So I like that Huck's starting to catch on and that he really tried to stand up for James in that moment too. But of course, you know, those white men did it anyway because Huck's a kid and James is a slave.
Right. All right. Next, Dumb and Dumber, aka the King and the Duke, try to take over a revival already going on by another con man. So they go into this town. There's a revival going on. And I'm not really clear on that, I guess. I don't know if that's another con man or if it's the actual, maybe, because they said something about Sunday, didn't they? Or that might have been in Huckleberry Finn. Because this happened in Huckleberry Finn where they came upon this revival. We went completely different, but I'll get to that in a moment.
I think they thought that it was another con man.
Yeah, okay. So they try to take over this con and they get up there in front of the crowd. And their downfall is when the king tries to recite, but ends up misquoting Shakespeare's "A merchant from Venice. So the actual quote is, I am a Jew, hath not a Jew's eyes, hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions. So there's a lot of irony here, right? So he's trying to recite this powerful speech about humanity and discrimination while being a part of a system that denies humanity to enslaved people. And the speech itself is about demanding recognition of basic humanity and equality. And this parallels directly with James' own situation as an enslaved person. There's also a commentary on prejudice and persecution, linking anti-Semitism with racism and slavery.
Yeah.
And Everett's using it as an allusion to deepen his themes about humanity, prejudice, and recognition of basic human dignity.
Right. Yeah, which we see because then the crowd completely turns on them after that. They're like, did he just say he was a Jew?
Right.
Because they're a Christian crowd, and they're like, why is this man just said he's a Jew? It's like they, that's almost just as bad as him being black, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So just lack of education all around too on their end. But yeah, but it definitely, it was what turned the crowd against them, which is very interesting.
Right. So in Huckleberry Finn, like I said, they did go to this revival and they did take it over, but they didn't get chased out at the end like they did in James. They ended up making $87, which back then I'm sure it's a lot of money.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And then from there, they went to another town and they set up this whole Shakespearean festival thing where they were gonna get James and Huckleberry Finn to play different parts with them in these different little Shakespeare plays. Like they weren't doing whole plays, just little sections of them. But I think this shows how much more sophisticated Everett's commentary on slavery and racism is compared to Twain's.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because there wasn't anything in Huckleberry Finn about being a Jew and all that stuff and being chased out like that. So
right, because
I think that.
Well, because Huckleberry Finn, Adventures of Mark Twain's, it was supposed to be more fun, a little more lighthearted, probably.
Right.
Yeah. Versus James is trying to really be critical on both that text and slavery as a whole.
So when they all run out of town, they get chased out of town. Huck and James get away from the two con men. And there's two key quotes here that I like. So James says, folks be funny like that. They take the lies they want and throws away the truth that scares them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is funny to me because, well, it's not funny, but it's like James is able to show his intellect because, I mean, this is a very profound sentence, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's still masking his dialect and delivering a philosophical observation. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That he can still, show how smart he is, even when he's talking in that slave dialect.
Right.
And this quote itself, it's just another commentary on slavery and racism where, people accept the lies about black inferiority, but they dismiss the truth about the humanity of those enslaved people.
Right. Which is also a commentary on society today as well, because we still see this all the time. We see this going on with MAGA, just wanting to believe the things that they want to believe and pretend that all the other stuff he was saying isn't true. And also how just people today are still so easily conned. People are constantly still getting conned today, believing things, all these, AI calls and things like that. So it's pretty easy. It's still pretty easy to convince a lot of people of something that's not true. So, and this has always been happening, and it probably will always continue to happen.
Right. And that's kind of the whole thing with this DEI stuff that's going on, right? They bend the truth of what it really is. They say, oh, well, we just want merit-based. Well, that's what fucking DEI does.
Right. Well, and
it's
also
so you don't hire the white man that's mediocre compared to the black man who is better qualified. You're going to, back in the day, people that would hire the white man, even though he was mediocre. Yeah, he can get the job done, but he's not as good as the black guy, but he's white. So they hired him. And that's what DEI is trying to stop.
Right.
But then they turn it around and say, no, we want merit-based. Well, that's what the fuck it does, moron.
Oh, whoa. No, but you're right.
It just pisses me off.
Well, and also people don't understand either that the people who actually benefit, the demographic that benefits the most from DEI are white women.
White women. Yeah, I know.
Are white women.
Yeah. See, so, they turn it around though and say also that DEI is a quota to hire so many brown people, and it's not that.
Which that's not what it is.
And that pisses me off when I hear people say that because they're construing it to make it that's what it's like, and it's not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's her face? Mr. Trump's press secretary. She's doing a really great job of conning a bunch of people.
Right.
She's really up there spinning webs. That girl's crazy.
Yeah.
She's like a pro. She's a pro.
I try not to watch it as much as possible.
Oh, I love it. She's really a pro at conning the American people, or at least trying to. But yeah, anyway, back to the book.
So then the second quote, that was the first quote. Man, we went off on that one. The second quote is from Huck, and he says, I can see how much you miss your family, and yet I don't think about it. I forget that you feel things just like I feel. I know you love them. And this is just showing Huck's realization of James' humanity. When you compare this to Huck Finn, this is considered a breakthrough for Huck, right? To show his realization of James' humanity. While in James, it's shown as a basic truth that should have just been obvious all along. And that just goes back to like the big quote I talked about in the last episode where, fighting for equality, but you're not allowed to speak on your own equality because it's obvious, right?
Yeah, but also the idea too that it does. I mean, Huckleberry Finn has grown up in this world where it is just indoctrined. So him really having to like do a lot of mental gymnastics in order to get to the truth.
All right, moving on. The king and the duke end up catching up with Huck because they stole a boat, but because Huck and James can only travel at night for fear of being seen on the river during the daytime, the two clowns can travel in their boat both day and night, so that gives them double the speed, and they end up catching up and actually getting ahead of them.
Yeah, I was so mad, but I was so ready to be done with them at that point. I was so tired of them. I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
They're back.
Ugh, I hate them.
So now that they have caught back up to them, Duke ends up beating James in front of Huck before going into this next town. And they go into this next town and they do some drinking at the saloon, and then they want to go to sleep for the night. And they take James and Huck to the blacksmith so James can be put in irons. And here they meet Easter, which is another slave working in the blacksmith. Easter seems to question whether or not Huck is white, which is surprising to me.
Yeah, and there's also, I got from this, an implication that James might actually be Huck's father, because the way Easter phrases it is he asks about the story of you and your boy. He says, like, what's the story between you and your boy? And, like, did you teach him how did you teach him how to pass? And James kind of brushes this off. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, I knew his parents. Like, he's not, like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he kind of drops it. There's also later on where they're just kind of having he's teaching James how to do the blacksmithing. And he kind of just like in the middle is like, so people don't know, do they? And again, James kind of is like, I don't know what you're talking about. They drop it again. So I have a theory that James might be related to Huckleberry Finn in some way, shape, or form. That's my theory, because he has been taking Huckleberry on in this fatherly kind of way. And now we have this implication of like Huckleberry Finn kind of looks black, and the way that Easter phrases it, he says, "Your boy." So I'm like, I wonder if he sees like similarities between James and Huckleberry Finn, like facial features. So that's my theory, which I think would be a really cool layer to add by Everett. That's an interesting thing to dive into.
Maybe he's his father because he thought he was at least partially, Easter thought Huck was partially black. So yeah, that would add a pretty cool layer. I like that idea. We'll see what happens.
We'll see.
All right. So Easter and James are talking. Huck was pretending to be asleep while they were talking, and he heard them not speaking in the slave dialect. So Huck wakes up, or acts like he wakes up, and he questions Jim about it. He's like, "Do you trust me? Because I heard the way you were talking." And then he finally just says, I understand why you talk that way. So this is showing, Huck doing some more critical thinking here.
Yeah.
All right. So the king and the duke, they show up early the next morning, and Easter had unlocked Jim after he locked them up because he had a spare key. And they see, they got there so early that Easter hadn't had time to lock James back up. So they see that James is unlocked. What happens is they have a little conversation about asking James if he did it, and then they come down to the point where Easter just didn't lock him up good enough. So the Duke grabs a bullwhip and hits Easter in the arm, causing him to bleed. And then right when this happens, Easter's master comes in, Wiley, and asks who hit him. And Wiley thinks that James belongs to the Duke and says, okay, well, since you hit my property and damaged my property, that can't work anymore. I'm going to take yours and make him do some blacksmithing for me.
Yeah.
Which is all kinds of fucked up in
Yeah,
anyway.
all kinds.
But anyway.
And then there's also the conversation too between like him, between James and Easter. You know, Easter's like, he's not really a bad guy. If he didn't own slaves, he'd kind of be a good guy. He treats me well as long as I do the work right. So another layer onto that of, if he didn't own slaves, he'd be a good guy. And that even his slave is saying that. Yeah. So
yeah,
very, very interesting dynamic all going on right there in that scene.
What do they call that? It's a little bit of it's some kind of syndrome.
Oh, it's
Came
Stockholm.
about in the 70s. Yeah, Stockholm syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Easter kind of talks James through some blacksmithing, and they're doing some other talking. Like you had mentioned, they talk more about Huckleberry Finn possibly being part black. And then during this conversation, James finds out that there was another slave that was hung for stealing a pencil. And he knows exactly who that is. It's young George.
Yeah, stealing the pencil. And in that moment, James, he thinks to himself, because he thinks like, oh, and I have the pencil in my pocket. And then he thinks, and I thought the pencil instead of my pencil. I don't know if you caught that quote. He was like, I realized that I said the pencil instead of my pencil, which I think breaks down, his right to ownership. Since he's always been a slave, does he have the right to own anything since he is owned by other people? And also, a right to the knowledge that he has.
Right, because we talked about that last week, that the pencil kind of represents forbidden knowledge.
Right. Yeah. So him kind of him also having to do mental gymnastics to be like, no, I'm a free person. So it's interesting that I said the pencil instead of my pencil. Again, just more like breaking down the dynamics and James having to kind of realize that he has freedom. And again, it does tie back to the reading, when he was reading and he realized he had this power, this power of knowledge. Right. So another tie into that, which I thought was cool. Also, just a little silly thing too. There was a conversation between Easter and James when they were talking about like religion and how if white people are in heaven, then they don't care to be in heaven with those white people. And they were laughing about it, which I thought was super funny.
I remember that part. It was funny.
Because I always say to my friends or anybody, I'm like, well, hell sounds like much more fun to be in than heaven, and I'd rather go there anyway when I die, because it sounds like more of a party. Like all the fun people sound like they're going to hell, so I'd rather get into that club, honestly. So I liked that conversation, because I've thought that before too. They're like, why would we want to go to heaven if white people are going to be there when they've treated us like this in life? So that was funny. That was another little interesting take on religion too by Everett.
Yeah, he has lots of takes on religion.
Yes, which you love.
Yes. All right. So now James is doing some blacksmithing and he's singing. He didn't really want to, but Wiley asked him to sing, and someone overhears him singing, Daniel Decatur Emmett. So this Daniel Decatur Emmett hires, in quotes, really just buys James from Wiley for his Virginia Minstrels singing group. So Emmett tells James he and his group are opposed to slavery, but he wouldn't go as far as calling themselves abolitionists, which, that's just, it's like, you're opposed to slavery, but not going that far. In other words, they're fine with slavery, but we're opposed to. I mean, it's just more hypocrisy being pointed out here by Everett.
Yeah, another take on, these white men who were so-called abolitionists against slavery, but not really. Still kind of racist.
Right.
Yeah. So then they teach James the song Jimmy Crack Corn. Tell him, whatever, it's easy. You'll catch on. There's no need to really sit here and learn it. They're easy songs. You'll catch on. Just keep singing it. And they give him clothes to wear. They don't have shoes for him though, so he has to go barefoot, and they say they'll put boot black on his feet. Then we meet Norman, who's the one putting on James's blackface. And Norman tells James to drop the slave talk. And it turns out that Norman was a slave as well, despite looking white. So James gets a little confused about this, and none of the other members know. He explains to James that they sing slave songs in the show, and sometimes they write their own slave songs, and they even do the cakewalk, which is a dance slaves did to mock white people. Like James says, but that's how we make fun of them. And Norman replies, it's never occurred to them that we might find them mockable, which I thought was funny.
Right, and I looked up this cakewalk dance, and the reason it's called a cakewalk is because the white people that they're making fun of actually picks a winner, and whoever wins gets a cake. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it was like whoever gave a cake to whoever they thought had the best dance, right?
Right. And the dance was making fun of them. So they're rewarding them for making fun of them, which I think is very cool and funny and ironic.
Yeah. So Norman goes on to explain that he's there to make money to go back to Virginia to buy his wife. So then that has James wondering, if he's going to get paid. And he starts to think like maybe he'll be able to go back and buy his wife and daughter. He realizes too that he's explained by Norman that he has to pretend to be a white man in blackface. And James is kind of like,
right, because this whole group wears blackface. Yeah, I don't think we mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, well, sorry, minstrel show kind of implies to me, but yeah, that they're all doing blackface and they're performing as slaves and they're singing slave songs, and this is what minstrel shows were, which blackface was prevalent before the minstrel shows, but this is kind of where it starts to really take off. So in order for James to be accepted into wherever they're going, into towns, into the auditorium, because technically he's not supposed to really be performing because he's black, they have to put blackface on him and then also kind of like leave white spots around too, so that people think he's white in blackface. And then he even questions, he asks like, okay, well, like, how should I speak? And Norman's like, just don't talk at all. Just don't say anything as much as you can. So James does his first performance. He catches on quick, just like Norman said he would, because Norman says it's music for idiots. And while they're in their performance, a white woman in the crowd fancies James and comes up to flirt, which puts James in a very scary position. And he tries to speak as little as possible. Her father then comes up and he's all protective and notices James' hair and says it feels real. He says it feels like the N-word hair, but that's what he says. He's like, this feels like real. This feels like real hair. So he's touching his hair. So Emmett comes to try and save James. He says it's a wig. He tells the man, don't touch it. It's expensive. They kind of get into it. And James grows more fearful after this situation, as the man seemed especially terribly racist and said he could smell a slave from a mile away. So James starts to think about maybe running. And Emmett tries to brush it off as like a close one. And he's kind of laughing about it. And he asks, well, what would they have done to you had they found out, James? And Norman says, what would they have done to all of us? Which shuts Emmett up pretty fast. He's like, good point, and kind of becomes a little bit more thoughtful about the whole situation.
Right, because I think, they wouldn't have just done anything with James. They would have went after the whole group, I'm sure.
Yeah, because then they would have been perceived as maybe, abolitionists or slave apologists or whatever.
Yeah, and then the whole thing with touching hair. Oh, God. We have these issues still today, right? Where white people think they could just go up and touch a black person's hair.
Yeah, and absolutely.
I just saw a video on TikTok yesterday about this, where this old white man, this black woman, she's standing there filming herself, and this guy just touches her hair, and then he just throws it down. And she stands there like she didn't know what to do, which I feel very bad for her, because if I was her, I probably would have slapped the shit out of him.
Right.
But yeah. Just go touch. You don't do that to other white people. So what the fuck do you think gives you the right to do that to a black person?
Right. Which this definitely was Percival Everett speaking on that, because that is a big thing in the black community about people always wanting to touch their hair. So this was very much like commentary on that for sure. Pretty blatantly. And James recounts the man touching his hair and how it made him feel anxious and it made him feel angry. And I think even in the book, he says slaves don't usually have a right to feel anxious. They don't have a right to feel angry, but I felt anxious and I felt angry. And he thinks more about running away, and he wonders how Emmett would react to him running away. He thinks a man who refused to own slaves but was not opposed to others owning slaves was still a slaver. So he's still nervous. I would
agree with that.
Yeah, so he's still nervous about running away, because even though Emmett didn't quote unquote buy him, he hired him. Still sounds like a slaver to me. And then later that night, the man comes back and breaks into their tent to touch James's hair again. That he's woken up.
He just could not get enough, huh?
No, he's woken up by this white man touching his hair. And the white man's super suspicious. He's suspicious. He starts asking all these questions. And then Emmett comes in and turns it around on him and basically accuses him of being gay. Right. Which, of course, is the worst thing a man can be called, especially in this time.
Especially back then, I'm sure.
Yeah. And then he runs away. The man runs away, and they're like, we got to pack it up. They pack it up real quick to leave. Yeah. And while they're packing up, Emmett apologizes to James, which leaves James really confused. I mean, yeah, this Emmett character is very interesting to James, because it's he's a slaver, but he's what's going on here? I don't know how to feel about this man.
A normal slaver would not even apologize. They would just be well, whatever.
Right. So it was very confusing.
So it's like he does have some, good intentions, but it's just not, he's just not completely over the finish line yet.
Right. Right. So while they're talking too, Emmett sings to James is his new song, Dixie's Land is what he calls it. And now we didn't mention this earlier, but Dan Emmett was a real person, and he is the most believed to have wrote Dixie. There's some back and forth about it because some people later tried to claim they wrote it, but he's most famous for having write Dixie. So Dan Emmett, he founded the first minstrel troupe, the Virginia Minstrels, which is what they're called in the book here too. So this is like a real historical context reference. And blackface was already established before him, which I mentioned before, but he made it into the minstrel show that we know now with everybody in blackface. Every character in blackface is a slave. And the song Dixieland, Dixie has a pretty controversial history because it became the battle cry for the Confederate Army. And apparently Emmett himself reportedly told a fellow minstrel, if I had known to what use the Southerners were going to put my song, I will be damned if I had written it.
Interesting.
So after the South began using his song as a rallying call, Emmett wrote the fife and drum manual for the Union Army. So I guess that was him trying to help his conscience a bit.
Right.
But this is just another real life example that Everett is using of a man who was praised to be anti-slavery doing some kind of racist things, whether unintentionally or not. We don't really.
Right. Because he's almost there, like I said before, but he just can't get across that line, right?
No, I was just saying, so I like Everett, again, using these actual historical contexts, these actual historical people, these historical white men who we have this idea of being so anti-slavery.
Right. And that's what I was going to say is I find this very interesting because, this isn't anything that was in Huckleberry Finn because we're now separated. They're separated. So this is all James' point of view in the book James. And so this was all added by Everett. So it's really cool. And I like that too. It's I really like how that turned out.
Yeah, me too. I also just love history and historical texts and historical fiction. So I like that he's putting in these actual historical figures into the book to make his points.
Right. Yeah. Like with the dreams and stuff about the enlightened philosophers and stuff. It's really cool too. I like all that.
Yeah. So later, in this conversation as well, James discusses payment with Emmett. He questions him about it. Emmett says he's got to do enough shows at $1 a performance on the days that they perform to pay him back the $200 that he spent on him.
Right.
In slave dialect, James asks Emmett if he's trying to make a distinction between chattel slavery and bonded slavery, which you made a point of this earlier, James saying something really philosophical in slave dialect and how he can still do that. Because even in this paragraph, he says it in slave dialect and he says to himself, he's like, I don't know if I meant to say this out loud, but I guess I did because I said it in slave talk or because I said it the way that I said it. And Emmett's like, can you repeat that? What did you just say? And he says, do you mind repeating that? And James says, I do mind, actually. And then he doesn't repeat it.
Right.
Yeah. So that was another instance of that happening, which you touched on earlier, which is cool. And again, trying to call out this white man and then the white man being like, I don't even understand what you're saying to me. So another way to do that. So yeah. And then at the next town, Emmett declares that the town is way too rowdy and too scary for James to perform in and that he can't lose another tenor, which is very suspicious since James owes him 199 performances to be free. And now he's finding reasons to take away these performances is kind of what I saw.
Yeah.
So once the troupe sets off, James, he steals some food, but he also steals the leather notebook that has Emmett's songs in it. And he runs.
But just to give Emmett the benefit of the doubt here, they did say the town was pretty rowdy, and they did kind of have a little bit of a run-in with that one man that wanted to touch his hair, so he might have felt a little scared.
Yeah, definitely.
About bringing him in there.
I think he was definitely scared, but I think also that kind of was like, oh, now I can kind of use this excuse too to make him stay around a little bit longer.
Last longer, yeah, right.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a scary thing that works to his advantage.
Right, exactly, yeah. And that wraps up our discussion on James by Percival Everett, chapters 18 through 32. This book keeps getting deeper, and we can't wait to see where it goes next. There is just so much to talk about. Next episode, we're diving into parts 2 and 3, so be sure to read ahead and join us for the conversation. In the meantime, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What's standing out to you so far? Drop us a message on Discord, TikTok, Instagram, or Blue Sky. All the links are in the show notes. We'll see you next time. Our intro music is Upbeat Funk, performed by Mikhail Smusev, and our outro music is Lo-Fi Chill, medium version, performed by Bodan Kuzmin. You can find both tracks on pixabay.com. Thanks for joining us, family, and we'll see you next week.